Well, chances are, if you went to school, you thought it sucked. And most people, at least in the US, have gone to school K through 12 for the most part. And that's 13 years of initial education. And there's probably not a single person in this audience who thinks that everything was smooth sailing. There's no way to improve the system or their particular experiences, and it's fine as it is, and nothing needs to change. But it doesn't seem like that's actually the case. Probably statistically, there's a large percentage of people who thought that it sucked, and that's kind of sad because the education is supposed to be the gateway to open doors and pave new roads and make our future.
Yeah, we're all skillless, fat, and miserable. And I feel like somehow it started with those horrible public schools that we're all forced to attend.
Hey, public schools, that's where creativity goes to die, right?
You see nothing but those hallways, just absolutely decorated to the T with crayon drawings of all the same picture that had to be filled in. Can't can't color outside the lines or else you're going to get beaten. Um,
Wow.
and then
I,
they make sure that you sit in your desk for like 8 hours a day. Forget recess. That's been going away. That was going away ever since I attended school. It's like we got less and less time for going outside. And then they're like, oh, we have an obesity crisis. It's like, oh, really, fuckers? How do you think that came about?
Everybody knows humans don't really need to move. It's like, I mean, just look at a dead person. It's like death is static. Death is not movement. Life is movement, whether that's, blood pumping through your body, neurons firing, but they're all forms of movement.
On top of that, too, it's like, if it was, oh, this is the necessary thing to prepare you for all the things that life you're going to encounter in life. And yet we get out there and then we go to apply for any sort of job and there's this list of skills that I'm like, I didn't even know these existed. Like, well, what are these skills that I even need to obtain to have this job? The hell is SQL? What the hell is Python? What the hell is any of these other things? I never learned about this. I learned how to do the Pythagorean theorem and how to wipe my ass correctly.
It's funny that everybody I talk to, it seems that's older than I am, they did seem to learn real skills. And that's everything from balancing a checkbook, which, yes, I understand checks have fallen by the wayside, but have we learned how to set up like auto pay for a bill when we do ultimately get a credit card, or how a T ledger works for credits and debits, how interest rates work on money that you will owe in the future? No, it's just like they just learn about how the run on the banks in the early 1900s caused a bunch of stuff to mess up. And that's why we've only made the situation worse and allowed banks to have a zero reserve where they can just lend out. It's like, how about if we just let them do anything, then there won't be a run on the banks. It's like, that's not the solution. But we don't learn any of these real life things in school anymore. Even doing laundry, I don't know. And I know that there are some classes out there that are elective and you can learn how to do things when you live on your own, but not all schools offer them. Most people choose not to take them because they allow us to be lazy, and we'd rather, sleep in study hall or just have an early dismissal or a late arrival to high school, because people are young and because we're just kind of, we perceive that life is exhausting and we're beaten down, that if given an easy road as an option, then it's understandable that they would choose that instead. I want to go hang out with my friends. It's like, well, why is that? That's because school sucks and they don't want to be there anymore.
It's not because they're necessarily immature kids. I think too much of the onus has been like put on the victim blaming aspect. Like students just don't understand the value of good education. Actually, they probably do, and you're just not offering one.
Yeah, they probably realize or it's like they realize that it's not that they necessarily even know what a good education is, but they know that what they are receiving is not one.
yes, it's like, if we're forced to choke down Charles Dickens and the myriad of other American writers, but you're never taught fundamentally why that's important or like why that makes you a better contributing member to society, then the entire, process of going through that education, I think, is wasted on the unnecessary friction that that causes. And like, you didn't explain yourself first. You didn't tell the students why this is so important. You're not enforcing that constant aspect that how this is going to actually improve your life if you go down and you study these certain things. So even something like in the humanities, you're which is supposed to be like the most enjoyable part of the school day. Like I remember having my drawing classes; those are always my fun classes that I like to take as my electives. Um, and then that's just to circumvent the other 6 hours of unnecessary bullshit I had to take.
And I'm sure it's only been further compounded by the pandemic where people were uh like isolated, socially isolated, and then they're forced to communicate through just online methods with their friends through phones or through social media, or like the Zoom chat or whatever, WebEx, whatever program they're using. And then when they finally come back together, because they're young and impressionable and sensitive, it's just like a lot of chaos and instability. And then everybody's probably seeing all those different band classes where people are either like in personalized tents or they're forced to wear masks because the policy says to, but because they're playing an instrument, typically they have to like blow air through something unless they're in like percussion or guitar or something. So then they have to cut a hole in the mask, but then they're being told that wearing this mask that covers their cheeks and every portion of their body except where the actual canal is that connects to their lungs, where it's supposedly just a respiratory virus. It's just so. What are we telling? What kind of message are we sending them when we're allowing them to do this and enforcing a weird standard? Like, yeah,
Compliance.
okay, listen, you have to cover your cheeks, but you don't have to cover your mouth. Like, what if I coughed when I'm gonna take both my hands, I'm gonna touch my face, like my cheeks, like I'm surprised. I'm making the surprised look on my face right now. And now I just cough. Did that do anything? Yeah, is that any protection? It's kind of weird. I don't know. What are we
It
doing
really is
here?
like these idiotic, like, I don't think the band director is the head of epidemiology at their local hospital or whatever. It
It's like,
does
hey, I
seem
gotta
silly that there's no. It's like, really, there was no protocol for this put in place. Like, what the hell are the school board directors doing then? Like, if you can't even put together a plan for this is how we're going to tackle a respiratory virus, which, by the way, we have flu season every year in schools. So it's like they didn't even prepare for a worse version of that. They
That's
just
a
like to
very
sit
good
on
point.
their asses and collect a paycheck. By the way, if you didn't know, your school districts, the people at the top of the school boards make a shit ton more money than the teachers actually teaching the students. And if they don't do anything, if they don't even create policies and procedures that are, I don't know, like even uh, tangentially uh, reasonable, you're not like cutting a hole in your fucking mask so you can blow an instrument. It's you have to ask yourselves, like, are you really getting the most amount of that money, or it's like, can you just do away with that sector and maybe save your district some money?
Yeah, and the higher up you go, definitely there's a substantial increase in money that you make, but is there a equivalent increase in productivity and value that they're providing back down to the people that they're overseeing and the school that they're supposed to be serving? And at least anecdotally, my impression and experience with people who are superintendents are that it's a political position that they swing a wild and heavy hammer at people that challenge them, and it's their way or the highway, and they can have a long running criminal background, and still hold that position. And then when they're confronted about that, they're so arrogant and pompous that they can just say, well, there's nothing you can do about it. And just like that's supposed to essentially be a public figure that represents the culmination of your child's education, or your education if you're the one in school. So it's
Yeah,
crazy
it's
to,
completely like it's more or less a protection of the school against the parents than it is the other way around. It's not some sort of like real benefit, I think, to the individuals in the public schooling. I don't know why the principal needs his own principal. I remember
hmm.
when I was going to school and they were just like seemingly adding assistant vice principals like left and right, and it didn't make any sense. So I was like, why do we need so many vice principals? We had like three or four of them for our school, which only had like a graduating class of 300 students or something like
I
that.
can say, at least in my experience, that is like the correct height of management, though. The vice principal and the principal, they're close enough to everything that
Yes,
they're actually on site. They're on
agreed.
site, so they interact with teachers, they interact with students, they're part of the discussion. And at least in my own education, uh, I've been neutral or very positive towards principals. And I just remember elementary school, especially, we had a great principal who was very involved in getting kids to read more books, and he would do fun things if we read so many books. And like he's very motivational. Everybody would go to the cafeteria, the lunchroom, or the gym or whatever, and he would give um like not a lecture, but some sort of speech, and it was just what kids needed.
Oh, that's
And
really
like, I don't
excellent
know,
to
people,
hear.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
I'm
you,
not.
I don't know, jump on a pogo stick, or you could pie him in the face with like, a paper plate and whipped cream, or he would like dye his hair in front of everybody. If like the whole school collectively, like if we all read 200 or 400 books or whatever it was, then he would do these things. So,
Yeah,
and if
that's
you didn't
fantastic.
if you didn't reach the goal, it wouldn't happen. So that's another really important thing that's missing from society, is there's like, if you don't reach the goal, you still get the participation trophy. If you don't do this, well, there's like no consequence, there's no accountability. And
Yeah,
not that you
guess
have
what
to be
happens?
punished, you just have to like not get the reward. That's what needs to happen. Like, you got to hold up your end of the bargain, because like if you have a two-parent structure, and let's say it's a mom and a dad, and you go to your dad and your dad says no, and then you go to your mom and your mom says yes, like it's not really like, well, you just know how to work the system then.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right in that that sort of like level is appropriate. I don't think that the principal should really need to answer to anyone. I mean, like otherwise, what's the point of the principal? And to hogtie the power of the principal feels like that's you're not giving the captain adequate control enough of his ship. You're just going to sail into iceberg after iceberg
Yeah, if we look at it,
because you
just
have
look at
to
that
create an
word.
unnecessary chain of command.
Yeah, the captain like has to radio in across the Arctic Sea to some sort of like control center. We're headed for an iceberg. I need permission to turn right.
And they're like, "Well, we don't really believe you that there's an iceberg there.
Yeah,
Can you
please
can you
send
show us
documented
proof?"
proof.
We'll get back to you next week after we reconvene.
It's like, yeah, listen, I'm out to lunch. I'll be back at 2:30.
So I can continue drinking. We had superintendents, I believe, that were stuck in the drink, as they like to say, which
Oh
again is
yeah.
just like completely
Wow.
fucking asinine. I don't know how that happens, but then I look at the rest of the way that our government functions, and I was like, oh, that's exactly how that's supposed to function. Now it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when there's like multiple offenses, and you're like, and this is public record? Yeah. And this is still happening. Yeah. Okay.
Like
All
this
right.
guy
Just
has to
wanted
be
to make
driven
sure.
to work every day because he can't legally drive a car. He has to be driven by his 17-year-old son that attends the high school.
Who
And
probably
you too,
receive
son,
some
could be a
sort of
complete
benefit.
you could become a complete fucking drag on society, and you could make more money than everyone else who works there.
uh, and through nepotism, son, as long as you keep doing what I want you to. This office will one day be yours.
Through hand jobs, all things are possible.
Oh man.
And then like here we are sitting in class learning about some unknown bullshit, which is like, man, I would really like to know how to start my own business or how to like properly do my taxes, because like you were saying before about decoupling consequences from actions, you're more or less saying like, well, well, what happens when I don't pay my taxes? I just didn't feel like doing them. Should I still get my participation trophy in the mail? Do I still get that extra check?
Wow.
It's like, no, you don't. You go to jail if you have a repeated sort of offense of not doing your taxes.
Man, that's crazy. Yeah, that would be really interesting because people also do make mistakes. So even an acknowledgement of, hey, if you get wrapped up in the criminal justice system, these are the general series of events that occur. This is what it's like if you have to go to court. I hope that you don't, but a lot of you will. And if that were to happen, this is generally how that process occurs. And there's also a path back to a recidification or whatever it's called, rejoining society if you go away for a while, or even just like, just because you have a criminal offense, you get a little misdemeanor or something, or you get a DWI, DUI, OVI, whether you're on drugs or alcohol, or it was in your system while you were operating some sort of motor vehicle and it was um, tested for. And, like you don't have to live a perfect life. And because we're humans, right? So
Mhm.
I'm not saying that that's like a thing to do, but if it does happen, then there should always be some sort of uh, treatment over punishment, or treatment. Uh, Not sure what I'm trying to say, but you got to get back into society, right? You got to
Yeah,
become
yeah,
productive. You can still live your own life. It's not over if you, especially if there were no damages. Like, yes, like driving drunk is dangerous, but if no one got hurt, like that's a silver lining. But even if you did like a week in jail and had to pay $10,000 and you're emotionally feeling pretty low and you're in financial difficulty, like, well, you probably still have another 40 years of life. So let's get you
yeah.
back on track.
Which we could also say that what, all these fines and shit too. Like this is just a tax on the poor. This is like, okay, so this only hurts you more because you don't have enough money in savings or whatever, which isn't really punishment for the crime itself. It's just some sort of like extra thing of like, okay, this definitely does not affect everyone the same. This punishment. So why would they be given this sort of like you understand we live in a class society in which people have varying amounts of money, and yet everyone has same amount of time. So instead, you should just make it where it's like, okay, well, you have a day in jail, you have 2 days in jail, you have a certain amount of community service you have to do instead, and it's like you have all of these other options, which really should be more or less used instead of the monetary one, which I know they've been getting away from, but it's still historically the case that a lot of people are just paying fines left and right, and it's just like I just need to make it to my next paycheck. But it's like, oh, too bad, you have this one traffic infraction that's going to now set you back another like 6 months of your savings goal because you were going just a little bit fast, you weren't paying attention, you're probably thinking about the 17 other things in your life that you have to be focusing in on, because we've created a society that just kept accumulating responsibility instead of trying to make it more efficient. So it's not like that's taught in schools either. It's not like can you imagine how different our society would be if that, like, instead of learning that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, you get to learn something like, oh, this is how you test for water quality, so you know that you're not going to be drinking poison.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Yes, I do strongly believe in biology because we are life, but that could definitely be that subject could be improved instead of necessarily learning about, I don't know, the taxonomy of the different genuses of plants. Uh, like, hey, these plants are like poisonous, or these plants are, you can grow these. We're so separated
Exactly.
from our food source that yeah. That.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then like PEMDAS too. Like I understand the order of operations and all that kind of stuff is very important, but at the same time, so is doing your taxes. I didn't really have to factor polynomials in the last decade of my life. I might have done it for fun here and there,
But did you
but
sell Sally 5 watermelons and you had 10 and how many were left?
all I know is that I have more watermelons than Sally, so that bitch can go fuck herself.
Jeez.
Why would
Now,
why would Sally need my watermelons? I don't understand. These are my watermelons. But they should always rephrase it so it's like you have 10 watermelons and the government doesn't like that. How many watermelons do you have left?
how
It's
many
like, well, it's a
does the
good guess
government get?
because there is no real process to go about that. So, you should have like this meta level education where it's like, well, your police officer is unhinged and is threatening a gun at you. What should you do? And the answer is pray that this psychotic robot doesn't shoot me this day.
Speaking of school, why school sucks, we can expand that. Driving school. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah.
my driving school, I remember man, it was bad. Like I don't remember learning anything. I remember learning from my parents and my girlfriend's dad at the time, who taught me how to later on like drive manual transmission. Uh, but I remember my parents, my mom and my dad teaching me, and that's the only thing I remember because going to driving school, I just remember, they'll show you pictures of cars that are wrecked. It's like, okay, like yeah, everybody knows that if you like make like a big mistake, then you can end up in a car crash, and everybody knows you can die from a car crash. Like seeing a picture of a car crash doesn't. I'm not sure what that does. I'm not sure why that school costs $300. And I remember my driving instructor was a prior coal mine worker, and this guy was like, he made me take my hands off the wheel while I was driving, and like I was forced to put my hands in my lap while the car moved forward. And he said he would continuously tell me that the car drives itself, as if he worked, he's like the original Tesla employee. I don't know. There's no autopilot on the car that I drove. And I remember like getting out on the freeway, and there was a big grass median intersection. We got into like traffic that was standstill, and it was like a culvert in the center. It wasn't a flat median, and he was late for whatever was next. And I ended up driving through this grass median on the freeway and having to like that was an interesting experience because it was like my first time on the freeway, and I'm going through the center median, and like turning around on a freeway where there's traffic at high speeds, and I'm pulling onto a highway from grass. Uh, but like learning the reverse serpentine or whatever it's called, where you back into cones or back
Yeah.
around cones into the little square. He was like, "How you gonna tell grandma you hit her with the car? Just look in your mirror." Like he wouldn't let me look backwards, and I don't know. It's just like that's not how people drive in real life. The by like well, that is how some people drive in real life, only using their mirrors and not actually also looking with their own eyes with the direct line of sight. Um, but I don't know. I just had like so many weird experiences with
I'm glad you brought that
driving
up because I think that
instructors.
also adds that other layer to schools that we haven't really talked about, which is like the human element of the people that they hire is really fucking weird, and that you're like so much more likely to be abused in your public school than you are by like priests, Catholic priests or something like that. Um, so like our image of who's the abusers in society, we don't normally tend to like we have to maintain this image of teachers always being there for the right reasons, and yet they are often like those positions are what attracts people who have those sorts of proclivities that we want to greatly diminish in our society. I'm going to put that in the most polite way possible. Uh,
I remember having some
because
people that
otherwise it turns into firearms real quickly.
I remember somebody that graduated, and remarkably soon after they graduated, they were hitched with one of their high school teachers, and people had seen this person's car in the driveway of their teacher numerous times, and it's like, all right, I don't know. I'm not in that situation, but I know some people who are. young are mature and they are intellectually mature, but most of us are not.
It is quite wild. Okay, so we've talked about most of the bad shit that happens in school. Let's talk about what are ways do you think or we think that it should be improved upon?
This is a good point. We definitely all know the gems, the teachers who are just angels on earth. It's amazing that they're teachers and that we had the pleasure of being instructed by them, because it's not just about the course content. We see their perspective on life, their views. They might have like some recurring phrase that makes it funny that they bring up, their jokes. They're just good people, and they were meant to be educators in society, and we're really thankful we have them, and they're juxtaposed by the people who maybe shouldn't be in that position. And then we also see their struggles where they have these really good instructors, and they may, in more or less words, tell you that they're a coach because they do like teaching and instructing, like whatever that sport is or the after school activity, but they're also doing it because they need money and because teachers don't make a lot of money, or at least not in my experience, they don't. They're like, I remember one of my schools, they were requiring people to get a master's degree within so many years of teaching, but they're only going to pay you like an extra, I don't know, $1,000 a year maybe, or just to continue to have that job or to be hired in to teach this high school civics position, you have to have a master's in like history. And it's like, well, I mean, what's the application? What's the extra conferred benefit from forcing these teachers to pursue beyond a bachelor's to teach? Like, the curriculum is chosen for them. Most teachers do not get to choose their curriculum. And I think that's another
Right.
interesting thing. They're provided a curriculum. They have landmarks or milestones they have to get through. They have standardized tests that's determined by the state or some other educational body. And they're actually, when you have a creative teacher, that's surprising because they're operating within a very confined space. So for them to be able to extract creativity, and when it seems like they're coming up with the curriculum, that's impressive because they're not. They have a very limited selection of what they can choose from, and how their delivery, they're really like masters of delivery.
That was a very beautiful way of putting that. I definitely agree. I do want our listeners to know that I'm not a teacher hater. I definitely have had some fantastic teachers in my life that have changed them. I changed my, perspective on things numerous times over, especially my AP physics and AP stats teachers. They were just absolutely insanely knowledgeable. And, I came out of those classes knowing exactly what to look for wrong inside our journalistic attempt to use statistics in all the wrong ways in order to make some sort of malaligned point, but also in AP physics, learning all about um, how engines work. Like how my
Mm.
teacher built like he built a single cylinder engine that he cut in half, so he could show us
Whoa.
exactly what happens in the different chambers, in order to make all the different mechanics work. And he was so engineering based because he used to work at Caterpillar before he was a teacher, and so he had all of this engineering experiences that he would intermix into his teaching. So he taught the entire curriculum of AP Physics, and we knew what to do for the test and all that kind of stuff. But we also had the bonus of knowing how to like put together a basic circuit, or putting together like a small engine or something like that. It was really quite an undescribably amazing experience.
Your description of that is for some reason making me think of my earth science class in 10th grade, which is interesting, but maybe instead of learning about the difference between a cirrus and a cumulus cloud, if they just showed us like a heart and how a heart pumps, that would be amazing, because like everybody, to my knowledge, has a pumping heart inside of their living body. And that's like so core and fundamental to life. I'm not sure how that wouldn't be inspiring. And I know not everybody has like a knack or a appreciation for like the how physical mechanics work, but like I really enjoy like a cutaway of an engine. I remember watching a video of somebody breaking down how a gas pump works and how a gas pump knows to shut off. or how it messes up and prematurely turns off before you're filled up. And that's actually a very fascinating mechanical structure. And we all have those inside of our own bodies pumping blood multiple times, when you feel everybody has a heartbeat, and that's keeping you alive. So I don't remember really ever learning about anything like that in school, which is a shame. So maybe it's not only like the teachers, but it's the content. It's what's
Yeah.
not only what's missing, like, oh, I didn't learn how to do laundry. Okay, so now all my reds bled over, or I got a new pair of jeans, but I didn't realize the dye was going to soak everything in blue ink.
Mhm.
Um, that's like an entire subject that's missing, but then we can also manipulate the subjects that are taught and make them more applicable. Like you're talking about polynomials, and when's the last time you had to factor something or FOIL something. And yeah, you're right. So in an evolving, changing world, if we can make the subjects more accurately reflect what's happening, instead of like everybody's had that either technical instruction or they've learned how to do something, not even in school. Their parent, their uncle, their brother showing them, they say, well, this is how it's done on paper, but this is how you do it in real life. It's like, well, why don't we only ever learn how it's done in real life then? Because that's how it is really done. On paper, this is how you do it, but really this is what happens. It's like, so this is like a unnecessary, or like there's a checklist you have to do at work, and it's more practical to do it this other way. It's like, well, why don't we just have the checking instrument reflect how it's really done if that's the way that it should be done?
Mhm. No, you make all these really great points, and I think that this is kind of setting the foundation for how do we improve the different systems that we've come across. I mean, obviously, it seems like there's a lot of dead weight loss in the amount of not only time but like subject matter that's forcibly crammed down our throats, which could obviously be used for more productive pursuits. For example, like I just imagine how much better society would be if everyone kind of came out of high school knowing, the basics, let's say like real basic EMT stuff, real basic how to de-escalate a situation. I'm almost thinking of like if everyone was some sort of like minor form of a firefighter, a police officer, a medical professional, someone who is also a savvy business person, knows how to, you know, bargain their way to a good deal, figure out what value is, have some sort of household economic training so you understand when we're talking about value, we could be talking about all sorts of these different things. Talking about marginality is a great thing to teach kids. I've always loved this one example that I've used over and over again. It's so fantastic from my one economics professor in high school who ended up going on Jeopardy, by the way. He did fantastic in Jeopardy. The dude's brilliant, and I ended up going to the same college he did on recommendation just because he and I got along so well. But the way that he taught marginality was fantastic. He would always use this example of a deep fried Oreo, where
Huh.
like you go to a fair, it's like, and you get a deep fried Oreo because you love deep fried Oreos, and you could also like make fun of himself and just like as a fat guy, who doesn't like like of course I love the deep fried Oreo and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, he would explain it where like, that first deep fried Oreo that you have is the best one. And then every subsequent deep fried Oreo you have after that point in succession has less and less enjoyment until it completely inflects, and that you just like you would pay any amount of money to not eat an additional deep fried Oreo. And that was his way of teaching us how the sequence of marginal returns do not necessarily contribute the same amount of utility back into our overall lives. So it was just a fantastic example. It's humorous, it has that great just practical application right away. It's like I intuitively know exactly what he's talking about, so I don't feel inclined to go to the store and buy 80,000 apples because they're all on sale. you know it's one of those things I can introduce back into my life. I can introduce into business all of these different skills that aren't necessarily the ones that the curriculum dictates that we should have, but are nonetheless more important.
I like that a lot. We can really I think I would describe that as there's a huge difference between 0 and 1, and a lesser difference between 1 and 2. So if you get a whole bunch of ones, now you have a wide variety. You have the a breadth, and that's good. You have exposure to many things. It's I've heard of that principle before in the concept of like cheeseburgers or bottles of water when you're dehydrated. Like you'd pay a lot of money for that first water bottle, and then after you get some water, you're like, okay, like maybe I'm still thirsty, but I'm not willing to pay $40 for the next bottle of water or a cheeseburger. Once the more cheeseburgers you eat, it was really the first one that was the most valuable. And I really like your other idea too of some sort of like basic first aid. I mean, I don't know. Do people even learn how to do? People only learn about band-aids like just from life experience from being a kid, but a band-aid really is like more emotional than anything else. I like nobody's gonna die if they don't get that band-aid, right? Uh, they're not really learning how to like, I don't know, as sad as it is, I mean, maybe a dark topic, but some sort of, active weapon situation in a school. I don't want to say anything, I'll get the video taken down, but something like that you can imagine. Teaching students how to respond to help their fellow classmates or even themselves. Because unlike a lot of videos or movies, when somebody gets hit with a weapon, a projectile made of metal, no one ever puts pressure on it. They just lay there and like they have a conversation with somebody, and then they pass on to whatever comes next. And it's kind of weird because maybe they could be saved, and you just put pressure. Pressure stops bleeding, and that's the number one way that people die in those very tragic, unfortunate situations. So some sort of
You bring
like
up a
they,
really
they
excellent
don't
point there.
they don't have to be doctors. They just have to learn like basic skills. And uh I don't know. I just really have always felt like people are obsessed with band-aids, and band-aids don't really do anything. Band-aids are just like, oh, do you feel better, little Johnny? Oh, do you need, oh, let me kiss the boo-boo. Okay, okay, you're gonna be all right. But if you like
there's like
take if you take a round to your leg, you should know what to do, because that's way more important and your life depends on it, or could depend on it.
Mhm. And there's no reason why you couldn't take some gym time to learn about any of that stuff. Because I mean, like for as fun as racket and net was, you know, don't you think it would be like a little bit more advantageous if we had some sort of like advanced training on tactics?
Amazing.
Like
I love this. That's a wonderful, wonderful coalescence, because otherwise we're just adding more workload, and we understand there's only 24 hours in the day and you got to pick where you want to allot that time and your resources. So that's amazing. Instead of like you do a variety of, handball, dodgeball, jail ball, basketball, hula hooping, whatever, racquetball, instead of smacking the old shuttlecock around across the net. maybe maybe you learn one of those first aid skills. That would be really, that's perfect. It's literally physical education. And what's more educational about your physical body than learning how to remain alive when your homeostasis is threatened?
yeah, absolutely. Like you could even introduce something as simple as running as like you need to get out of this building right now. It is on fire. You could put any sort of scenario in there to have your whatever sort of physical education. I just think it's a great way to not only teach the students like why it's important, but also just intuitively they know that it is important when you recontextualize it in that way. So whether it's like you need to be strong so you can help carry people out, someone this person has had too much smoke and they've passed out. Like, can you and a few other students drag them to safety? And like all of
Wow.
this other stuff. Like, there's so many small things I think you could do over the years that would just make real anti-fragile children. Like between not only the simple monetary things like taxing and starting like how to do your taxes and how to start a business and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you could also do that as a class too. Like, why would our economics, like we learn so much economics that we take one look at the news and we realize that every politician just throws it out the fucking window. That like I don't even understand why we learned this type of economics if it wasn't for us just to get pissed at the news. Like we should just be learning how to do like how do we run a business? We should have like an entire semester where we like my favorite ones were always like inventing a pretend business and then trying to run things that way.
Oh.
We had that every once in a while in my classes over the years. And I always love those. It's like you have a certain budget, you have to figure out what to do with it. You know, you have to pay your upkeep costs, your building, you have to pay for your sewage, your water, your, you know, insurance, all this kind of stuff. And it really gives you a good sense of like just the complexity of the situation you're dealing with.
I like it. I had a similar, instead of starting a business, it was you had to pick from a hat, like a little piece of paper, and it had your salary on it. And then it told you what your like biweekly income was or whatever. And this is in middle school, and you had to like make a budget. You had to buy a car and you had to buy food and like make a schedule for expenses. And I remember I got one of the lower paying jobs, and it was like actually challenging and frustrating.
Mhm.
And then my teacher also told me that I wouldn't in real life eat hot dogs every day because it was the cheapest. It was like $2 for like a hot dog and a bun or something. I remember like telling them like, well, I would if I was poor enough. And like that is
Yeah, I was
also
gonna say like my actual life experience actually tells me that I would.
yeah, and like so it was a good project, but I also still think that I was right where if you're hungry enough and poor enough, then you will eat cheaper food
Oh yeah.
because there's no other way to do it. It's like you want to eat it or not. Okay. And then yeah, so maybe I don't know if people are still doing that in school, but that would be interesting because a lot of parents pay for cell phone bills, and I don't think young adults are likely to understand the true expense of their lifestyle nowadays
Yeah.
because parents are complacent, kids are just used to it and they don't know any better. They could know better, but they're not being like enlightened, or information is not being revealed to them, which is available, but they're not necessarily going to go seek it out on their own. Just like when we're talking about classes, if they could have the choice between an early dismissal or take an extra class, there's a good chance that a lot of them will just take the early dismissal. And it's like
Absolutely.
just a natural response, and that's why we have to, as adults, realize that we have options to set them up for success, or we could just let them not realize their full potential.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, in addition to all of this, I want the listeners to know too is that we're not talking about like any of these other things as if they're not important. But I think if we're to prioritize better subject matter that our students would benefit from, I think they would not only immediately see the benefit from it, but actually derive more benefit from it. There's nothing to say that you can't learn about the different types of clouds in your free time too. Like that's the fun stuff that you can go to the library for. That's
I
not
was
all
second
the stuff
guessing
on
that
YouTube.
anyways. Yeah,
I
because
mean,
it's
like
also
the
important to know when there's a storm coming and rain.
yeah, but they don't even teach you that though in like the like EPS sort of stuff, the Earth physical science classes. They don't even teach you like I couldn't predict the weather. They still can't predict the weather. They didn't teach me how to use a Doppler system. I don't know how to use any of that shit. I don't know how to operate a radio. It took 2 years of physics, never learned how to use operate a radio. It's just, it's one of those things that just wasn't in the course material. Sorry for not knowing what wasn't taught to me.
Now, when you were talking about pulling someone out of like a smoky room or something, I liked the idea of that, and it reminded me of when we were learning about how to deal with an active weapon system in the school where there's one or more bad guys. Um, and like the whole class was unified and like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Like the teacher would say, like, we're gonna, move a bunch of objects in front of the door, barricade in, and like if they break through, like you just have to throw things at them, attack them. Like I'm gonna hit them with a fire extinguisher.
Mhm.
And like the class is like unified and it's like inherently compelling content. So that would all be, I think, pretty well received. Um, it's, I don't know if exciting is the right word for it, but it's like a natural rush that you get that's very different from learning about something in a textbook.
Mhm.
And that could be the same thing with, hey, if there's like the smoky room and if you hold your breath and start pulling somebody, or I don't know, somebody's got like a broken leg and here's how you can help. Like you get under their arm and you help them stand up and you're basically like a crutch, and then you hop at their, or they hop at a slow pace, so you walk with them, and I don't know, like helping other people. And that would be maybe create the same kind of inspiration, because it's not just learning something in a book, learning how to how to factor a polynomial. It's like, oh man, like I'm gonna help get this guy out of this room or something.
Can you identify the gerund inside the sentence? Oh, the most ridiculous shit of just like, okay, well, maybe if we just cut down, and like, I think people would take this criticism as like, oh, you want to cut down all the necessary subjects in school. It's like, if they were really necessary, I would have seen them on a job application. But they're not, then there's no one really asking me in an editorial position what this particular part of sentence is and how it's somehow related to the amount of money that I make.
It's
And
really
yet at the same
fascinating.
time, yeah, it's all those things too that like, okay, you could learn that on your own and you'd be fine. And they have plenty of grammar books that probably do an even better job than what your teacher could possibly do. But I think the teachers themselves would also be more inspired if they were actually teaching practical skills. They would be more even more inspired, I would say, because like there are some teachers that, like you said before, they're just they really are these special creatures that like I don't know what I've done on this earth to deserve such an amazing opportunity to learn from them, but they really have made my life better. And teachers have the ability to do that. There's no doubt. It's just, how do we also increase the advantages for the teachers? They definitely need to get paid more, and I think that could easily be done by getting rid of the school board and just flushing things more downstream. Do we really need giant football stadiums? That sort of shit
Mm.
I think is ridiculous too. Like, especially because growing up where I was, we had okay stadiums. It's not like they were like really falling apart, but then they just decided to like completely redo them, and I don't understand what or like why that was.
It's amazing because it's a grass field and
Mhm.
has flat, long planks that people sit on, but whether they're made of wood or metal. So, like, how much really could that cost? The answer is a lot, but we're not really sure why. That's the same thing with
Oh yeah.
my area, as like sort of recently. Even though the schools were functional, they were like, we need to emergently tear them down and rebuild them. And it's like, well, what new benefit does that confer? Oh, it's a modular design. The windows are a little bigger. It's like, okay. Well, the HVAC systems required a lot of maintenance. It's like, well, I just change the HVAC systems then. It's
Yeah,
like,
they need
my window doesn't work on my car anymore. I got to buy a new car.
to.
Damn it, my trunk doesn't open. I gotta get the new F-150 now.
I mean, that's 100% accurate. It's that they're spending all this money left and right. Then they're like, oh, we need a levy or else we're going to shut down all the busing
It's for the
because
kids.
it's for the kids. How could you? How could you not? Yeah, they're a
Like,
bunch of fucking liars. They're a bunch of fucking liars. My parents were 100% correct about this growing up. And now realizing this in my young adulthood, it's just we have to speak up on this shit is that we have to demand complete transparency from these places. I'm going to like I'm going to start, when I have kids, I'm going to be at City Hall all the time, demanding to see all of the accounting that has gone into this school system, and I'm going to be that glad fly on the horse's ass of our school system to make sure that everything is in running proper order. And I will have allies. I will
it
make
seemed
allies.
I like that. I can appreciate that. It reminds me of, for some reason, when you go to a place where a picnic table is chained down into the ground, and you would say, oh, well, how many people are going to steal a picnic table? It's like, well, it's not that people would necessarily, there's not a ton of people that would, other than it keeps good people honest. Same thing with like you pick your item that you kind of wonder why there's this security there. And it's because when the opportunity is there, people will do things. When the balance sheets are not being closely watched, people will skew things to their advantage. They will, oh, let's have a vote for a levy at a very atypical time. So the people who would be against it, hey, if they didn't know about it, then they can't vote against it. So because we want it, we'll just get all the good old boys and girls to go vote for it. And they're kind of like manipulating the situation, it's not like necessarily a
Mm-hmm.
fair vote because of the timing. And because they're not being, there's a loss of check and balance. So they do, it would just benefit everybody because then they're like, okay, you're right. They're just kept in line as well. Yeah. Because there's so many levies that keep getting passed as well. And even if like one or two fail, let's say two fail, well, the last three passed and they lasted, 10, 15, 20 years. So they get like a stacking effect and they keep getting built onto each other. And there's more tax increases. And by the time, or they'll say, oh, it's not a tax increase, it's just a renewal. Well, how many other sources of incomes from different taxes and levies and grants have they gotten? It's not necessarily if we should increase or decrease, but is the amount that they're currently getting, where is that going? How is that being allocated?
Mm-hmm.
And that does seem to be largely obfuscated or in the dark. It's certainly not common public knowledge, even if it is publicly available.
Yes.
And how many people could really understand the large books of ledgers and where that money's actually going? And I just can't help but think about in the past, these places had almost no money, and yet people got educated. So why is it now that there's just these shock values where it's like we're gonna go under? It's like it's such a sense of urgency. Like they need $7 million and they need it now. They need it quick, or like the school system's gonna fail. It's like, well, I got a newsflash. That's weird. Like schools are still failing despite how much money they're getting. That seems to be proportional. It's a proportional relationship. The more money they get, the more they're failing. So maybe we should decrease their money.
Yeah, so the main takeaway from all of this is that we have had this strange inverse relationship where more money has never ever been sent into schools, and yet we've had apparently less positive outcomes from it. Simultaneously, we also have this phenomenon in which whatever they do apparently is just what magic on earth. The increase in levies that don't seem to have really increased the um, students' either livelihoods or educational prospects. Uh, the whole system obviously is corrupt. And the only way to get around that is to do and have more audits. And so we need to get the public involved and demanding to see everything that the schools are doing. And I don't think that that is any sort of, it should be their right. And if it's not their right, then we need to figure out a way to make it their right.
A lot of parents are just swiping on their phone at home anyways. Just make some sort of public application where the books are, because they're already available, also have them connect to the app, and parents can just look and see where their money's going, where their property taxes are going.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they have questions, they could like highlight a number or highlight a section, a region, and then they can like post their question. And then I don't know, CPAs or the accountants can say, oh, this is current, this number signifies this. It's being represented for the cost of new textbook buying, or this was for the internet connection and databases that we pay a subscription to as a tri-county school or something. And then just getting parents on the same page, or yeah, it allows them to expose or at least question um, numbers that are there that maybe shouldn't be there or should be less or
Yes,
more.
absolutely. That's kind of the base amount of interaction that I mean, like, we need to fix this system soon, because you can't just have our generations of future children, going into these mills and becoming miserable on the other end of it. We need to put a stop to that. We need the parents' help in this. We need the parents to get involved. We need the parents to understand what their role has to be in this, and why there's no reason why they can't know this information. There's no reason why it has to be secretive. There's no reason why it's only privy to a certain group of people. If anything, that is indication of fraud. Okay, that is just strictly indication of fraud. And I don't think that there's any wrongdoing in calling out all the people who are gatekeeping as fraudulent losers that need to either, you know, give us the information that we demand, step down, both, somehow just get out of the way, or else, there should be consequences for this going forward. There needs to be some sort of legal intervention from the parent side in order to make sure that these schools get back online, because as they are, we're just trucking down um, a pathway inevitable towards the worst combinations of political gerrymandering, unionizing, and all sorts of unnecessary politics getting in the way of our children's future education.
Yeah, that was so well said. And they're our children and it's our money.